My name is Martha, and I'm 32 years old. For most of my life, my family called me the antique shop girl, like it was some kind of joke. They never took my business seriously, always making comments about my dusty little store and my passion for old things. But last Thanksgiving, everything changed when my sister Janet accidentally discovered something that shocked our entire family. I had $15 million in my bank account. What happened next revealed the true nature of the people I thought loved me unconditionally, and it forced me to make the hardest decision of my life. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you can relate to family drama. And don't forget to subscribe, because trust me, this story has more twists than you might expect. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Growing up, I was always the odd one out in my family. My father, Harold, was a successful real estate developer who measured everything by conventional success metrics. He wore expensive suits, drove luxury cars, and expected his daughters to follow traditional paths to prosperity. My mother, Beverly, had been a beauty queen in her younger days and never let anyone forget it. She valued appearance and social status above everything else, constantly reminding us girls about the importance of making good impressions and marrying well. Then there was my sister Janet, 3 years younger than me, and everything my parents wanted in a daughter. She was popular in school, captain of the cheerleading squad, and seemed to excel at everything that mattered to our family. While Janet was winning homecoming queen and dating the quarterback, I was spending my weekends at Mrs. Eleanor's antique shop downtown, fascinated by the stories behind old furniture, vintage jewelry, and forgotten treasures. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the family motto whenever my name came up. During family dinners, the conversation always centered around Janet's latest achievement, while my interests were politely tolerated at best. When I announced I wanted to study art history in college, my parents reluctantly agreed, but made it clear they hoped it was just a phase. Janet, meanwhile, chose business administration, which earned her endless praise for being practical and smart about her future. After college, the divide became even more pronounced. Janet landed a prestigious corporate job at a marketing firm and got engaged to Bruce, a guy from a wealthy family who fit perfectly into my parents' vision of success. They were constantly bragging about Janet's salary, her downtown apartment, and her plans for an elaborate wedding. When I told them I wanted to open my own antique shop, the room went silent. My father actually laughed and asked if I was serious about playing store for a living. I found a small space in the less fashionable part of town, nothing fancy, just a modest storefront with good lighting and enough room to display furniture and smaller pieces. The rent was affordable, which was important since I was starting with limited capital and a lot of hope. My family visited exactly once during my first year, and I still remember my mother's comment, "Well, it's certainly quaint, dear." The way she said quaint made it sound like a terminal illness. Family gatherings became exercises in patience. Every holiday, every birthday, every celebration revolved around Janet's accomplishments, while my business was treated like an amusing hobby. I was living in a tiny apartment above my shop, driving a 15-year-old Honda and watching every penny, but I genuinely loved what I was doing. There was something magical about connecting historical pieces with people who would appreciate them, about preserving stories that might otherwise be lost forever. The constant message from my family was clear: I was the disappointment, the daughter who chose passion over profit, dreams over practicality. They weren't cruel about it, just dismissive in that polite way that somehow hurt more than outright criticism. I learned to smile and nod when they asked how my little shop was doing, knowing they expected to hear about struggles and were probably secretly relieved when I didn't ask them for money. What my family didn't understand was that my passion for antiques wasn't just about nostalgia or pretty objects. I had developed a genuine talent for recognizing value that others missed, and I was building relationships with estate sale organizers, auction houses, and collectors across the region. While they saw dusty furniture and old junk, I saw investment opportunities and historical significance. My first major breakthrough came during my second year in business. I was at an estate sale in an old Victorian house, looking through boxes of items the family considered worthless. Most people were focused on the obvious pieces: but I noticed a small wooden jewelry box tucked away in a corner priced at $50. Something about the craftsmanship caught my eye, and when I examined it more closely, I realized it was much older than it appeared. Back at my shop, I discovered that the box contained documents dating back to the Civil War era, including letters and military commissions that were incredibly rare. After authentication, I sold the collection to a private collector for $12,000. It was more money than I had made in my first 6 months combined, and it taught me an invaluable lesson about looking beyond surface appearances. I reinvested every penny back into inventory and research learning to spot pieces that others overlooked. I started building relationships with serious collectors nationwide, developing an online presence that allowed me to reach customers far beyond my local market. My reputation grew among estate attorneys and auction houses who began calling me when they had pieces they couldn't identify or appraise. The irony wasn't lost on me that while my family saw only my modest storefront and assumed I was barely scraping by, I was actually building a thriving business. I shipped items to collectors in New York, Los Angeles, and even internationally. My expertise was becoming recognized in the antique community, but I deliberately maintained the same humble appearance that had always defined my life. My second major breakthrough came when I discovered a cache of Revolutionary War artifacts in an elderly client's basement. The family had no idea what they had, pricing everything at garage sale levels. I spent 3 days carefully cataloging pieces that included authenticated musket balls, period buttons, and correspondence that museums would eventually pay substantial sums to acquire. Revenue was growing exponentially, but I kept living in the same small apartment, driving the same old car, and wearing the same simple clothes I had always preferred. My family's occasional visits to the shop reinforced their assumptions about my financial situation. "Still playing with old junk, Martha?" My father would joke, completely unaware that the junk he was dismissing included pieces worth more than his monthly real estate commissions. I made a conscious decision to keep my growing success private. Partly it was because I enjoyed the irony of their misconceptions, but mostly it was because I was learning valuable lessons about my family's true values. Their treatment of me when they believed I was struggling revealed something important about their character, and I wasn't ready to change that dynamic yet. Banking substantial profits and making conservative investments became my new routine. I worked with a financial advisor who helped me diversify into stocks and real estate, always maintaining the modest lifestyle that kept my family's assumptions intact. There was something liberating about their low expectations, allowing me to build wealth without the pressure of their opinions or demands. By my 5th year in business, I had transformed from a struggling shop owner into a recognized expert in American antiques and historical artifacts. Auction houses were consulting me regularly. Insurance companies hired me for appraisals, and estate attorneys knew to call when they encountered pieces they couldn't evaluate. My expertise had become my most valuable asset, generating income streams far beyond simple buying and selling. The breakthrough that changed everything came when I was contacted by the estate attorney handling the affairs of a reclusive collector who had died without immediate family. The house was filled with pieces accumulated over 40 years, and the distant relatives just wanted everything sold quickly to settle the estate. They were asking $300,000 for the entire contents, a sum that seemed enormous until I spent 2 days walking through the collection. What I found was extraordinary museum-quality pieces spanning several centuries, many with impeccable provenance and documentation. There were Ming Dynasty ceramics, colonial-era furniture, Civil War memorabilia, and Native American artifacts that belonged in the Smithsonian. The family had no idea what they were selling. They simply wanted the house cleared and the money distributed. I took out a loan against my existing assets and bought the entire estate. Over the next 18 months, I carefully researched, authenticated, and sold pieces to museums, private collectors, and auction houses around the world. A single Ming Dynasty vase purchased as part of the lot sold to an international collector for $400,000. The total return on my investment exceeded $2 million. My financial advisor suggested it was time to seriously diversify my portfolio. We invested in dividend-paying stocks, purchased several historic properties for restoration and rental income, and set up retirement accounts that would ensure my security for life. By the time I turned 31, my net worth had crossed multiple millions, but my lifestyle remained unchanged. During Janet's engagement party, I gave her a thoughtful but modestly priced vintage jewelry set I had restored myself. My parents praised my creativity, while clearly expecting nothing more valuable from their struggling daughter. Bruce made a comment about how artistic types show love through meaningful gestures, rather than expensive gifts, not knowing that the piece I had chosen was worth more than his monthly salary. Watching my family's reactions during these gatherings became a study in human nature. Their treatment of me was based entirely on their assumptions about my financial situation. They were kind, but patronizing, supportive but condescending, loving but dismissive. I realized I was conducting an unintentional experiment in conditional love, and the results were becoming increasingly clear. The decision to maintain secrecy about my wealth became more intentional over time. I was learning who my family really was when they believed I had nothing to offer them beyond emotional support. Their true values were being revealed through their interactions with someone they perceived as financially unsuccessful, and I was storing away every lesson for future reference. My confidence in business decisions grew with each successful transaction. I was no longer the uncertain young woman who had stumbled into antiques by accident. I had become a successful entrepreneur with expertise that commanded respect in professional circles, even if my family remained oblivious to my transformation. Thanksgiving had always been our family's most important gathering, a tradition that brought together 3 generations around my mother's perfectly set dining room table. This year felt no different as I drove to my parents' house in my reliable old Honda carrying a bottle of wine and the same pumpkin bread I brought every year. I had no idea that this particular Thanksgiving would become the day that changed my relationship with my family forever. Janet arrived with Bruce in their new SUV, practically glowing with excitement. The moment they walked through the door, it was clear they had news to share. After the usual greetings and settling in, Janet made the announcement that dominated the entire evening: she was pregnant. The room erupted in celebration, with my parents immediately starting to plan for their first grandchild and Bruce beaming with pride. I was genuinely happy for my sister. Despite our different paths in life, I loved Janet and wanted her to have everything she dreamed of. I congratulated her warmly and listened as the conversation naturally shifted to discussions about nursery plans, baby names, and all the changes this new addition would bring to our family. For the first time in years, I felt truly included in a family moment that wasn't about comparing my choices to Janet's achievements. As dinner progressed, the conversation took a turn toward practical concerns. Bruce mentioned that his company was facing potential layoffs due to economic uncertainty, and Janet expressed worry about taking unpaid maternity leave when they were already stretching their budget to afford their lifestyle. My parents offered emotional support and suggested that times like these were when families needed to help each other however they could. I noticed the pointed looks in my direction during this conversation, the subtle assumption that I would be the one needing help rather than offering it. The irony was overwhelming, but I kept my expression neutral and continued enjoying my dinner. They had no idea that I could solve their financial concerns with a single phone call to my investment advisor. When I excused myself to use the bathroom, I made the mistake that would change everything. I left my phone on the dining room table, something I had done countless times before without consequence. While I was upstairs, a text message notification appeared on my screen from my financial advisor, a routine update that I usually received monthly. Janet later told me she had only glanced at the phone when it buzzed, but the preview message was impossible to ignore. Congratulations, Martha. Your portfolio has officially reached the $15 million milestone we discussed. Call me next week to discuss rebalancing options. When I returned to the table, I could immediately sense that something had shifted. Janet was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and the conversation seemed strained. She kept glancing at my phone, then at me as if she was trying to solve a puzzle. I assumed she was just tired from the excitement and pregnancy hormones, so I didn't think much of it initially. The rest of dinner passed in an atmosphere that felt different from the celebration we had started with. Janet was quiet. Bruce seemed confused by her mood change, and my parents continued their enthusiastic grandparent planning while remaining oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. I helped clear the table and said my goodbyes, still unaware that my sister had discovered the secret I had been keeping for years. During my drive home, I replayed the evening in my mind, trying to understand why the mood had shifted so dramatically. Janet had seemed genuinely happy about her pregnancy announcement, but something had definitely changed her demeanor during the latter part of the evening. I chalked it up to pregnancy emotions and looked forward to being an aunt completely unprepared for what was coming next. The phone calls started 2 days later. Janet's first call came under the pretense of thanking me for dinner and asking how I was doing, but I could hear something different in her voice. She asked casual questions about my business, how sales had been lately, and whether I was managing okay financially. These weren't unusual topics for us to discuss, but there was an intensity to her questions that hadn't been there before. The second call was more direct. She asked if I had any investment accounts, or if I had been saving money from the shop. When I gave vague answers about putting aside what I could, she pressed harder, asking specific questions about amounts and account types. I started to feel uncomfortable with the interrogation, but still had no idea she had seen the message from my financial advisor. By the third call, I knew something was seriously wrong. Janet suggested we meet for coffee, just the two of us, to catch up, without the rest of the family around. Her tone was different, more serious, and I could detect an edge of anger or resentment that I had never heard before. I agreed to meet, thinking that perhaps she wanted to discuss her pregnancy concerns or ask for advice about something private. We met at a small cafe near my shop, Neutral Territory, where we could talk freely. Janet wasted no time getting to the point. She placed my phone number on the table between us and asked me directly about the text message she had seen on Thanksgiving. My heart sank as I realized my secret was out, but I tried to maintain composure while deciding how much to reveal. "Is it true, Martha? Do you really have $15 million? The question hung in the air between us like an accusation. I could see hurt and anger in her eyes, but also something else that made me uncomfortable. There was a calculating look that reminded me uncomfortably of our father when he was evaluating a real estate deal. I admitted that yes, my antique business had been much more successful than anyone knew. I tried to explain how gradually it had grown, how I had reinvested profits and made careful investments, but Janet wasn't interested in the details of how I had built my wealth. She was focused on the fact that I had hidden it from the family for years. "How could you sit there at dinner listening to us worry about money when you have millions just sitting in the bank?" Her voice was rising and other customers were starting to glance in our direction. I tried to calm her down and explain my reasoning, but she was too angry to listen to explanations about privacy and personal choices. The conversation became increasingly heated as Janet expressed her feelings of betrayal and deception. She accused me of being selfish and dishonest, of letting the family worry about finances when I could easily help everyone. She brought up Bruce's job insecurity, her concerns about maternity leave, and our parents' approaching retirement years as evidence of my moral failure. What disturbed me most was the immediate shift in how she saw our relationship. There was no congratulations on my success, no curiosity about how I had achieved it, no pride in my accomplishments. Instead, there was only focus on what my money could do for her and resentment that I had kept it private. The sister who had hugged me at Thanksgiving was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a resource to be accessed rather than a person to be celebrated. By the time we left the cafe, I knew that my relationship with Janet had fundamentally changed. She made it clear that she expected me to do the right thing for the family, though she was vague about what exactly that meant. She also made it clear that she would be telling our parents about my wealth, framing it as a betrayal that needed to be addressed by the entire family. I drove home feeling sick to my stomach, knowing that the peaceful anonymity I had enjoyed for years was about to end. More importantly, I was beginning to understand that my family's love might be more conditional than I had ever imagined. The family meeting was called for the following Sunday, presented as a casual get-together, but with an underlying formality that made my stomach churn. When I arrived at my parents' house, I found them sitting in the living room with Janet and Bruce, all wearing serious expressions that told me this was going to be anything but casual. The warm, welcoming atmosphere of our usual family gatherings had been replaced by something that felt more like a business negotiation. Janet had clearly briefed everyone on what she had discovered, because there were no surprised reactions when she announced that I had been hiding millions of dollars from the family. Instead, there were looks of disappointment, and what I can only describe as betrayal, as if I had committed some terrible crime by being successful and private about it. My father was the first to speak, his voice carrying the same tone he used when closing difficult real estate deals. "Martha, we need to talk about this situation. Janet has told us about your financial circumstances, and frankly, we're all very disappointed in how you've handled this." The way he said financial circumstances made my success sound like a shameful secret rather than an achievement. My mother was more emotional in her approach, expressing hurt that I hadn't trusted them enough to share such important news. "We're your family, honey. We should have been celebrating your success together, not finding out about it by accident." But even her hurt feelings quickly transitioned into expectations about what I should do with my wealth now that it was no longer secret. Bruce had prepared what sounded like a presentation about our family's collective financial needs. He outlined his job insecurity, Janet's concerns about unpaid maternity leave, my parents' inadequate retirement savings, and various expenses related to the upcoming baby. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had already decided that my money was partially his money, simply by virtue of marriage into the family. Janet was the most direct about her expectations. She had calculated that $5 million would allow them to buy their dream house, set up a substantial education fund for the baby, and provide security for their growing family. She presented this not as a request, but as something I owed her compensation for years of what she now characterized as my selfish deception. My parents had their own needs that they felt I should address. $2 million would secure their retirement and allow them to help with their grandchild's expenses without financial stress. They spoke about family loyalty and responsibility, suggesting that my wealth was somehow a family asset that should benefit everyone rather than just me. The most disturbing part of the conversation was how they had reframed my business success as a moral failing. Instead of congratulating me for building something valuable through hard work and expertise, they focused on my greed and selfishness in keeping the money for myself. There was no acknowledgement of the years I had spent building my expertise, the risks I had taken, or the careful decisions that had led to my success. As the conversation continued, I realized they had come to this meeting with predetermined conclusions about what I should do. They weren't asking for my help. They were demanding it. They weren't interested in my perspective on family loyalty. They had decided that my perspective was wrong. They had transformed my achievement into their entitlement, and they expected me to comply with their demands. The emotional manipulation was relentless. They brought up every family memory, every shared experience, every expression of love as evidence that I owed them financial support. They made it clear that my continued membership in the family was conditional on my willingness to share my wealth according to their specifications. When I asked for time to think about their requests, the response was immediate and harsh. Janet accused me of stalling because I didn't want to help my own family. Bruce suggested that any hesitation on my part proved I cared more about money than relationships. My parents expressed disappointment that I needed time to consider helping the people who had loved and supported me my entire life. The meeting ended with an ultimatum disguised as a loving request. If I truly cared about my family, I would do what was right and share my wealth with those who needed it. They made it clear that my answer would determine the future of our relationships, and they expected a decision within a few days. I left their house feeling emotionally battered and completely isolated. In the space of 2 hours, my family had transformed from my support system into my adversaries, and the love I had always counted on had revealed itself to be more conditional than I had ever imagined. The 3 days following that family meeting were the longest of my adult life. I barely slept, couldn't concentrate on work, and found myself questioning everything I thought I knew about my family and my place in it. The people who had raised me, who I had loved unconditionally my entire life, had revealed aspects of their character that I had never seen before. I made an appointment with an attorney who specialized in family law and asset protection, not because I was planning legal action, but because I needed to understand my options and obligations. She was kind but direct in explaining that I had no legal obligation to share my wealth with family members, regardless of their needs or expectations. She also helped me understand the importance of setting clear boundaries and maintaining them consistently. The attorney's questions helped me clarify my own thinking about the situation. She asked whether I believed my family would have made these demands if I had inherited the money, rather than earned it, and I realized the answer was probably no. She asked whether they had ever expressed interest in my business success before discovering the financial results, and again the answer was clearly no. These questions helped me understand that their demands were based on opportunity rather than genuine family need. During those 3 sleepless nights, I replayed every family interaction from the past several years, looking for signs I had missed about their true feelings toward me. I realized that their treatment of me had always been based on their assumptions about my financial situation. They had been kind but patronizing when they believed I was struggling, and now they were demanding and entitled when they discovered I was successful. The most painful realization was that they had never valued me for who I was as a person. My intelligence, my expertise, my business acumen, my personal growth over the years, none of that mattered to them. They saw me only in terms of what I could provide, whether that was entertainment value as the quirky antique girl, or financial resources as the secretly wealthy sister. I thought about my nephew or niece who would be born in a few months, and I genuinely wanted to help provide for that child's future. But I also realized that giving in to these demands would set a precedent that would define our family dynamics for the rest of our lives. If I handed over millions of dollars because they demanded it, what would they expect next time they faced financial challenges? The decision that crystallized during those 3 days wasn't just about money. It was about respect boundaries and what kind of relationships I wanted to have with my family members. I could give them money and continue being seen as a resource to be managed, or I could maintain my boundaries and risk losing relationships that might not have been as genuine as I had believed. I also consulted with a therapist who helped me understand the emotional manipulation tactics my family had used during our meeting. She pointed out the guilt trips, the conditional love, the reframing of my success as selfishness, and the way they had made their financial planning my responsibility. Understanding these tactics helped me see the situation more clearly and gave me strength to resist the emotional pressure. By the 3rd day, I knew what I had to do. I would return to my family with clear boundaries and reasonable offers of help that didn't compromise my financial security or personal autonomy. If they rejected my boundaries, I would learn something important about their priorities and my value in their lives. I called my parents and asked to meet with everyone again, saying I was ready to discuss the situation and share my thoughts about how we could move forward as a family. Walking back into my parents' house for the second family meeting felt like entering a courtroom where I was both the defendant and the judge. They were waiting in the same formation as before, expectant faces showing they assumed I was coming to announce my compliance with their demands. The confidence in their expressions told me they had spent the week planning how to spend my money rather than considering my perspective. I had prepared carefully for this conversation, writing down my key points to ensure I communicated clearly despite the emotional intensity I knew was coming. I started by acknowledging that I understood their financial concerns and that I genuinely wanted to help my family in reasonable ways. This seemed to relax them initially as they assumed I was leading up to the answer they wanted to hear. Then I explained my position. I would not be giving anyone millions of dollars, but I was willing to help within boundaries that maintained my financial security and personal autonomy. I offered to contribute $5,000 annually to my future nephew or niece's education fund, a sum that would provide meaningful help over 18 years without compromising my own future. I offered to help my parents with small emergencies or specific needs as they arose within reasonable limits. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Janet burst into tears, accusing me of being selfish and cruel to my own family. She calculated that my offers amounted to practically nothing compared to what I could afford, and she was right from a purely mathematical perspective. But I tried to explain that the amount wasn't the point. The principle of maintaining boundaries and making decisions about my own money was what mattered. Bruce's response was the angriest. He accused me of being one of those entitled rich people who forgot where they came from and abandoned their families once they achieved success. He brought up every family gathering, every shared meal, every moment of support I had received over the years as evidence that I owed them more than I was offering. His voice rose as he talked about my obligation to ensure his child had advantages that his salary couldn't provide. My parents' disappointment was perhaps the hardest to bear. They spoke about family values and loyalty in ways that made my boundaries sound like betrayal. My mother cried as she talked about how she had raised me to care about others, implying that my position proved I had lost my moral compass. My father was more direct, calling my offers insulting and suggesting that I was not the daughter he had raised. I tried to explain what I had learned about their treatment of me over the years, how their love seemed conditional on their perception of my financial status. I pointed out that they had never valued my business success when they thought it was modest, and they weren't celebrating my achievements now that they knew the truth. But they weren't interested in self-reflection. They were focused on my refusal to meet their financial demands. The conversation devolved into accusations and emotional manipulation that surpassed even my worst expectations. Janet accused me of not caring whether her child had opportunities for success. Bruce suggested I was mentally ill to value money over family relationships. My parents questioned whether I had ever really loved them if I could refuse to help when they needed it most. As the attacks continued, I felt something shift inside me. The guilt and confusion I had been carrying for days was replaced by clarity and strength. I realized that this wasn't really about money at all. It was about control and entitlement. They wanted to dictate how I used my wealth, and when I refused to comply, they were revealing their true feelings about me as a person. I stood up calmly and gathered my purse, preparing to leave. I told them that I loved them and that my offers of reasonable help would remain open, but I would not be manipulated or controlled by emotional blackmail. I explained that their response to my boundaries had taught me important lessons about our relationships, and I needed time to process what I had learned. Janet's final words as I walked toward the door were, "If you leave here without giving us what we need, don't expect to be welcome back." My father added that I was choosing money over family and there would be consequences for that choice. My mother just cried, which somehow hurt more than the angry words. I walked out of that house knowing that my family relationships had been fundamentally altered, possibly forever. But I also walked out with my integrity intact and my boundaries firmly established. For the first time in my life, I had chosen my own well-being over my family's approval, and despite the pain, it felt like the right decision. The months following my decision to maintain boundaries with my family were filled with grief, growth, and unexpected discoveries about my own strength. Initially, I went through something very similar to mourning, because in many ways I had lost the family I thought I had. The people who had raised me and shaped my early years were still alive and living just across town, but our relationships had been irreparably damaged by their demands and my refusal to comply. I continued working with the therapist I had consulted during the crisis, using our sessions to process the complex emotions of family estrangement and financial guilt. She helped me understand that setting boundaries wasn't cruel or selfish. It was necessary for my emotional health and future relationships. She also helped me recognize the patterns of manipulation and conditional love that had probably been present in my family dynamics for years, hidden beneath surface expressions of care and support. The hardest part was accepting that my family's love had always come with conditions I hadn't recognized. When they believed I was struggling financially, their love was expressed through pity and low expectations. When they discovered I was successful, their love became demands for financial support. In neither case was I valued simply for being myself, and that realization was both painful and liberating. I threw myself into my work with renewed passion, finding comfort in the straightforward nature of business relationships and the satisfaction of connecting historical pieces with people who truly appreciated them. My expertise continued to grow, and my reputation in the antique community provided a sense of professional family that was based on mutual respect rather than obligation or entitlement. Gradually, I began building what therapists call a chosen family of friends and colleagues who valued me for my personality, interests, and character rather than my financial status. These relationships felt different from my biological family connections because they were based on genuine mutual interest and respect. People sought my company because they enjoyed my conversation, not because they wanted something from me. About 6 months after our final confrontation, my father called to invite me to Janet's baby shower. His tone was formal and somewhat cold, but he made it clear that I was welcome to attend if I was ready to be part of the family again. The implication was obvious. I could return to family events if I was willing to reconsider my position on financial support. I declined the invitation politely but firmly, explaining that I wasn't ready to resume normal family relationships while the fundamental issues remained unresolved. Janet gave birth to a beautiful daughter named Carol, and I sent a thoughtful gift along with a card expressing my love for my new niece. I also set up the education fund I had promised, ensuring that my contribution would grow over time and provide real help for Carol's future. My gift and card were acknowledged with a brief thank you note, but there was no invitation to meet my niece or participate in her early milestones. Using my wealth responsibly became an important part of my healing process. I established scholarships for art history students at my alma mater, donated to organizations that preserved historical artifacts, and supported young entrepreneurs who were starting their own businesses. These philanthropic activities helped me feel that my money was making a positive difference in the world, even if it wasn't being used to solve my family's problems. The business continued thriving, and I eventually expanded to include consultation services for museums and private collectors around the world. My expertise was recognized through speaking engagements and published articles providing professional satisfaction that my family had never acknowledged or celebrated. Building a successful career based on knowledge and skill gave me confidence that had nothing to do with family approval. As time passed, I realized that my family's rejection had actually freed me from a lifetime of trying to earn love that was fundamentally conditional. I no longer had to worry about disappointing them or living up to their expectations, because I had learned that their expectations were based on what I could provide rather than who I was as a person. The most important lesson I learned was that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about people who support your growth, celebrate your successes, and love you unconditionally. My biological family had failed that test when money entered the equation, but I was building new relationships that were based on healthier foundations. Looking back now, I can honestly say that refusing to give in to my family's financial demands was one of the best decisions I ever made. It was painful and lonely at times, but it allowed me to discover my own strength and build authentic relationships based on mutual respect. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's entitlement, even when that someone is family. My life today is filled with work I'm passionate about, relationships that nourish my soul, and the peace that comes from living authentically rather than trying to please people who were never really pleased with me anyway. I have financial security that allows me to make choices based on my values rather than fear, and I've learned that true family supports your success rather than demanding to control it. The door I closed on my family's demands opened windows to a life that's more genuine and fulfilling than anything I had before. While I still feel sadness about the relationships I lost, I'm grateful for the lessons I learned and the person I became through that difficult experience. So I want to ask you, have you ever had to choose between family expectations and your own boundaries? How do you handle relationships with people who seem to love you conditionally? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because I'd love to hear your perspective on family dynamics and financial boundaries. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family money and personal growth. And don't forget to share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family pressures. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you feel less alone if you're facing difficult family decisions. Remember, you deserve relationships that celebrate your success rather than demanding to control it. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next story.